You will always be told that African kingdoms were weak and that they could not fight European colonizers. Even you would be told that African kingdoms sold their own people into slavery to Europe. That's the tempered truth, and the reality is always kept hidden. For example, you will never be told about a 16th century powerful queen who had genius diplomatic and military skills who freed African slaves from Europeans. She was so potent that her armies fought the Portuguese troops and defeated them. Not only that, but she knew the diplomatic maneuvers and struck an alliance with the Dutch, using them against the Portuguese. But who was this African queen, and how genius a politician, diplomat, military commander, nation builder, and powerful was she? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you about a courageous African queen whose story is never told because she kicked out the Europeans. Let's get started. Queen Nzinga Mbande was born around 1583 in the Kingdom of Ndongo, located in what is now Angola. She belonged to the Mbundu ethnic group and was the daughter of Ngola Kiluanji Kia Samba, the ruler of Ndongo, one of the most influential kingdoms in the region. Her upbringing in a royal household profoundly shaped her as a leader, instilling in her a sense of duty and strategy. From a young age, Nzinga showed exceptional intelligence and leadership abilities. Her father, recognizing her potential, made sure she received the same education as the male heirs of the family would. This was a rare opportunity for women at the time, but Nzinga's education covered key areas like diplomacy, governance, and military tactics. Additionally, she mastered the Kimbundu language and later learned Portuguese, which enabled her to communicate effectively with European colonizers and local allies, a skill that would prove invaluable later in her life. During Nzinga's youth, Central Africa was under increasing pressure from European colonizers, particularly the Portuguese. By the late 16th century, the Portuguese had established a foothold in Angola, driven by the lucrative transatlantic slave trade. Their campaign of military conquest aimed to dominate Ndongo and other African states, gaining control of the land and its resources. This colonization effort set the stage for the tense political environment Nzinga would face as she grew into a leader. Nzinga's rise to power came after the deaths of her father and her brother, Ngola Mbande, who had ruled Ndongo after their father. Initially, Nzinga acted as a governor for her young nephew, but her leadership skills and decisiveness quickly outshone those of her male relatives. Her brother's reign had been marked by internal conflict and a strained relationship with the Portuguese, but Nzinga recognized the need for a stronger hand in dealing with European powers. Her diplomatic prowess was first demonstrated in 1622 during a peace negotiation with the Portuguese. Queen Nzinga deeply knew where she should confront and fight, and where she should use her mind and negotiate. During this meeting, Nzinga made a memorable stand by refusing to sit on the floor, while Portuguese officials were provided chairs. Instead, she had a servant kneel, using him as a chair to assert her equality. This bold gesture symbolized her refusal to be seen as inferior or subjugated by the Portuguese. Europeans had never seen this before. Now they knew it wouldn't be easy to negotiate with such a queen who knew her power and position. The talks were held in Luanda, a city under Portuguese control, as the Portuguese had been conducting aggressive military campaigns to subdue the Ndongo kingdom and expand their influence in the transatlantic slave trade. Nzinga's primary objective was to establish a peace treaty that would halt the ongoing conflict between the Portuguese and her people. Her goals were clear: to end the devastating Portuguese slave raids on her kingdom and to negotiate the return of Ndongo land that had been taken by the Portuguese during their campaigns. She sought to protect her people and restore Ndongo's sovereignty over its territories. The resulting peace agreement was intended to temporarily halt Portuguese military operations in the region. It included terms that required both sides to return captives and restore some territories to Ndongo. However, the Portuguese soon violated the treaty by continuing their slave raids and efforts to expand their control, forcing Nzinga to adopt a more aggressive stance in her resistance. Following the death of her brother, Nzinga seized full control of Ndongo, officially becoming Queen of Ndongo and Matamba. But what did the Portuguese and other Europeans want from her kingdoms? Well, wherever there were resources, Europeans came there as if those resources were their own. It was a shameless approach to lay claim to something that did not belong to them. In this respect, the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba held significant geographical importance in Central Africa, playing critical roles in regional politics, trade, and the struggle for power during the 16th and 17th centuries. Both kingdoms were located in what is now Angola, Ndongo to the north of the Kwanza River, and Matamba to the east. Their strategic positions made them vital players in both local and international trade, especially in the transatlantic slave trade. One of the most important geographical features of this region was the Kwanza River, a major trade artery in Central Africa. Control of the river granted access to vital resources and facilitated the transportation of goods, including ivory and gold, which were highly sought after by European traders. The fertile lands along the river's banks supported prosperous agricultural communities, which allowed Ndongo and Matamba to maintain strong populations and powerful military forces. For Queen Nzinga, controlling the Kwanza River was essential for maintaining local commerce and ensuring the flow of goods to and from European markets. In addition to its agricultural wealth, the region was rich in iron, which was essential for the production of weapons and tools. This natural resource was crucial for the kingdom's ability to defend themselves and sustain military campaigns. The wealth generated from agriculture and trade gave Nzinga a strong economic base from which she could resist Portuguese encroachment and maintain her independence. Beyond economic factors, Ndongo and Matamba were culturally rich societies with deep traditions in governance, religion, and social structure. The Mbundu people were the dominant ethnic group in the area, and their political system was centered around the Ngola, or king. The Ngola was not only a political leader, but also held spiritual authority, acting as a mediator between the people and their ancestors. This spiritual connection gave Nzinga's rule a sacred dimension, which she skillfully used to legitimize her reign, even as a woman in a male-dominated society. As for Matamba, which Nzinga later brought under her control, was particularly significant due to its matrilineal social structure, which was more open to female leadership than Ndongo. After facing setbacks in Ndongo due to Portuguese military pressure, Nzinga regrouped in Matamba. She not only rebuilt her power base, but also established Matamba as a stronghold for those fleeing Portuguese oppression, including enslaved people and displaced populations. Nzinga's reign over these two kingdoms was marked by both military resistance and diplomatic efforts. She formed alliances with other African kingdoms, and even the Dutch, who were eager to weaken Portuguese influence in the region. This tells about Nzinga, who was the only leader who used her intelligence to fight one European power by using another European power. The Dutch supplied Nzinga with weapons and military support. This strategic partnership strengthened Nzinga's defenses and enabled her to maintain independence in the face of persistent Portuguese aggression. By siding with the Dutch, Nzinga cleverly handled this rivalry, securing much-needed aid for her kingdom. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. She played the two European powers against each other, engaging diplomatically with the Portuguese when it served her purposes while strengthening her position through the Dutch alliance. This tactical maneuvering not only protected her kingdom's autonomy, but also allowed her to challenge the Portuguese's efforts to dominate the region. Nzinga's diplomatic skill in forming alliances with European powers, particularly as a woman in a male-dominated world, was unprecedented. She exemplified how African rulers could engage with Europeans on an equal footing. Nzinga's ability to gain respect from powerful foreign entities through diplomacy, negotiation, and alliance building, demonstrated her as a masterful leader, teaching Europeans lessons in statecraft during a time when African leaders were often underestimated. But she knew when to use force and how much. Nzinga's military brilliance was reflected in her use of guerrilla warfare, a tactic that allowed her smaller forces to outmaneuver the better-equipped Portuguese. Rather than engage in large, head-on battles, Nzinga deployed her forces strategically, taking advantage of the dense forests and rugged terrain to launch surprise attacks and retreat swiftly. This approach frustrated the Portuguese, who struggled to counter her agility and deep knowledge of the terrain. These tactics allowed Nzinga to maintain her stronghold in Matamba, even as the Portuguese continued their efforts to dominate the region. What's more, Queen Nzinga Mbande was a master of psychological warfare, and her strategic use of these tactics went far beyond symbolic gestures like the famous chair incident during the 1622 peace negotiations. She knew that brute force alone would not be enough to defeat the better-armed Portuguese forces. Instead, she focused on breaking their morale and creating an image of herself as invincible. Nzinga often staged elaborate ceremonies that played into European fears of African spirituality, giving the impression that she had mystical powers. By amplifying these fears, she built a reputation as a ruler protected by spiritual forces, which not only unsettled her enemies but also strengthened her hold over her own people, who saw her as a divinely favored leader. Nzinga's opponents, particularly the Portuguese, were often ignorant or superstitious about African spiritual practices. She used this to her advantage, reinforcing the idea that she was more than just a political leader. She was a spiritual and mystical figure that could not be easily defeated. This approach allowed her to gain the upper hand in situations where traditional military tactics might have failed. By manipulating the perception of her strength, Nzinga effectively made her enemies feel like they were facing something far greater than just another ruler. Nzinga's diplomacy went beyond just military alliances. To further secure her position, she converted to Christianity, which helped her gain favor with European powers while maintaining traditional African religious practices privately. This ability to manage complex political matters was key to her success, allowing her to secure both African and European alliances while preserving the autonomy of her kingdom. Beyond her immediate enemies, Nzinga's diplomatic skills extended across Europe. While she engaged primarily with the Portuguese and Dutch, she also reached out to other European powers like the English and Spanish, understanding that the more alliances she could build, the more leverage she had. Her ability to think globally and strategically set her apart from other rulers of her time. Nzinga sought out these partnerships not just for military support, but also to support her financial and political strength. Though her most successful alliance was with the Dutch, her efforts to engage with multiple European powers demonstrate her versatility and adaptability in a challenging colonial environment. But she was not just a military commander and negotiator, but also a liberator, especially considering the context of 17th century Central Africa, where the transatlantic slave trade was ravaging communities. The Portuguese, along with other European powers, were deeply invested in the capture and sale of African people, with millions being sent to the Americas. Nzinga, understanding the destructive impact of the slave trade, took decisive action to protect her people and end slavery within her kingdom. Yes, she banned slavery hundreds of years before any other state did. She freed enslaved individuals under her control and offered sanctuary to those who escaped from Portuguese or other African slave traders. Nzinga's anti-slavery standing was not just a moral stance but also a practical one. Her kingdom's population had been depleted by Portuguese raids, and by resettling freed individuals, she was able to rebuild her population and strengthen her rule. These freed people became loyal subjects, willing to defend the kingdom that had liberated them. What's more, Nzinga's military was bolstered by the incorporation of freed slaves, who were highly motivated to fight against the Portuguese. They were not just fighting against a European power, they were fighting against slavery to save their future generations, and this meant going to all means. These individuals, aware that defeat could mean re-enslavement, became some of Nzinga's most dedicated fighters. This strategy allowed her to turn a vulnerable population into a powerful force, demonstrating her exceptional leadership. Freed slaves not only strengthened the ranks of her army, but also contributed to the overall strength and resilience of her kingdom. What's more, Queen Nzinga strategically adopted male children from noble families, securing their loyalty and political allegiance. This practice of adoption allowed Nzinga to form powerful alliances without the limitations that a traditional marriage could impose, such as issues of inheritance and control. By adopting sons from important families, she maintained control over her kingdom and avoided any risk of losing power to a male consort. This innovative approach to alliance building demonstrates Nzinga's political brilliance and ability to reshape traditional structures to suit her needs. Nzinga's military strategies also extended to espionage. Alongside her renowned use of guerrilla warfare tactics, she maintained a network of spies and informants who provided her with crucial intelligence on the Portuguese. These informants gave her inside information on troop movements, supply chains, and military plans, allowing her to disrupt Portuguese operations before they gained momentum. Nzinga's use of espionage kept the Portuguese on the defensive and helped her maintain control over her territory despite their ongoing attempts at colonization. This strategic intelligence gathering was not common for African rulers of the time, and it gave Nzinga a significant advantage. Her ability to anticipate and counter Portuguese strategies allowed her to outmaneuver a larger and better-equipped enemy. By combining psychological warfare, espionage, and strategic alliances, Nzinga was able to maintain her kingdom's autonomy for years, even in the face of persistent European aggression. As a cultural leader, Nzinga played a critical role in preserving the traditions of Ndongo and Matamba, while incorporating external influences where necessary. Her ability to balance these dual identities, both as a Christian ruler to the Europeans and as a protector of her people's traditional customs, demonstrates her adaptability and strategic foresight. She ensured that, despite European efforts to impose their systems and beliefs, her kingdom retained its cultural autonomy. When Nzinga passed away in 1663, her death marked the end of one of Central Africa's most dynamic reigns. However, the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba continued to maintain their autonomy for many years, which showed the strong foundation Nzinga had laid during her rule. Her successors carried on her policies of resistance against the Portuguese, and the legacy of her leadership ensured the long-term survival of her kingdoms in the face of European expansion. Nzinga's impact extended far beyond her lifetime. She set a precedent for how African rulers could engage with European powers on their own terms, using diplomacy and military strategy to maintain sovereignty. Her reign demonstrated that African rulers could resist colonial domination, protect their people, and preserve their cultural identity. Today, Queen Nzinga is remembered as one of Africa's greatest leaders. Her ability to resist colonization, free enslaved people, and preserve her kingdom's cultural identity has hardened her place as a legendary figure in African history. Did you know about Queen Nzinga Mbande, who showed Europeans how diplomacy is done? Isn't it true that she was the one who gave Europeans the concept of women empowerment, not the other way around? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what you know about Queen Nzinga and her timeless actions and strategies. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.